Hi everyone, and welcome to another video in my Composing Harmonies series. About a week ago, I made a community post requesting some unharmonized melodies from you, and the first one I received was this melody from David. So thank you, David, for this great example. Here's what the melody sounds like. Today, I want to discuss a few strategies for harmonizing this melody. I'm guessing a lot of you already have a good sense of how to harmonize this one, and that's in part because of the implied harmony, which I talked about in a previous video in this series. Even without vertical harmonies present, the melody implies a harmonic progression because of the close groupings of notes that outline chords. Take these first four notes for instance. C major is clearly outlined and metrically stressed in the measure. You might consider going through the entire melody and analyzing the pitch content, both overall and in small groupings like this. This particular melody has clear phrases separated by rests. So if I look at the first phrase, there's a C, a D, an E, a G, and an A. So that's a C major pentatonic or A minor pentatonic collection. The second phrase has those pitches plus a B natural, so that's now 6 of the 7 pitches in a C major or A minor scale. The third phrase introduces an F natural at the end, so by the end of measure 14, we've established either a C major or A minor diatonic collection. So I suppose step 1 in the harmonization process might be just to analyze the melody. I just looked at the pitch content and determined that the implied harmony is diatonic. Another part of this would be to look at structurally important moments within each phrase for clues as to the harmonic progression. I mentioned that there's an implied C major chord at the start. The beginnings of melodies are structurally important. The ends of phrases are also important. So measure 4 here ends in an E to G, which could be an E minor chord. It could be a C major chord again. It could be other chords, but those two are the most likely given the context. So I might want to look at the beginnings and endings of each phrase. Also, any place the rhythmic pace changes suddenly. For example, measure 12 here is in the middle of a phrase, but it stands out because the note G is longer than those around it. The F in measure 14 stands out for a number of reasons. 1, it's the end of a phrase. 2, it stands out rhythmically from the notes around it. And 3, it's the first time we've heard this pitch. So from a structural perspective, this seems like an important moment. Lastly, anytime you get a large leap or something else in the melody that just stands out to you, you'll want to take note of that. And of course, look at how the melody ends. There's a clear resolution from the leading tone B natural to the C. Everything here points to C major being the key of this melody. There are clues in the melody that can inform your harmonies, and you can decide whether to use them or not. And I'll talk more about that in just a bit. So after analyzing the melody, I suppose step 2 would be to make some decisions about the type of harmonic language and harmonic structure to use. And those clues in the melody itself can guide your decision making. By harmonic language, I mean like diatonic harmony, extended tertian harmony, jazz harmony, atonal harmony, just to name a few. This melody happens to be completely diatonic, which means that I'd probably have the easiest time fitting diatonic chords to it. Non-diatonic harmonies would work too, but I'll have to work a little bit harder to make them fit. I'll stick to diatonic triads in this video. In future videos, I'd like to broaden the type of harmonic language. And by harmonic structure, I'm referring to two things here: the harmonic pacing, or the rate of harmonic change, and also the number of chord tones in the harmony. You could simply add one tone per harmonic change, perhaps a bass line, or a contrapuntally harmonized part. You could add 2 notes, 3 notes, 4. The more unique notes you have in any chord, the more dense and rich your harmonies can potentially sound. That's not always a good thing. Sometimes simplicity is best. Or another thing to consider in the harmonic structure is how the harmonies evolve over time. For instance, I could have the first phrase start with just a single pedal bass tone. Then bring in a second harmony note in the second phrase, then continue to build and add more dense harmonies as the melody progresses. These are all things to consider. It may sound like a lot to keep track of, but at some point, if you do this enough, the process becomes instinctual. So now I'm going to make some decisions about this melody. I'll harmonize this a few different ways, each time with simple diatonic harmonies. Now to determine the number of chord tones and harmonic pacing. I'll keep things simple and choose 3 chord tones per chord and 1 chord per measure. So starting at the beginning, ignoring the pickup measure, this first measure has an E and a G. So if I want both of those notes to be chord tones, then my options for major and minor triads are C major and E minor. If I just need the metrically or melodically stressed notes to be chord tones, then I just need this E to be a chord tone, and any other pitches in the measure could be viewed as diatonic non-chord tones, like passing tones. So in that case, then A minor is also an option for this first measure, although many of you might hear that as an A minor 7 chord, which technically takes us outside of the diatonic triad collection. Obviously, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't use this chord if you like how it sounds. And a lot of how we hear music and label that music with theory is subjective. Moving on to the next measure, the notes are A, G, and E. Now, those 3 pitches present a problem because there's no diatonic major or minor triad with those 3 exact pitches. So either you need to have 2 chords in this measure, or you can decide that these pickups are structurally less important. So really, I only need to harmonize to that downbeat A. My options are A minor, F major, or D minor. Measure 3 presents another problem if I want just 1 chord to work. I could treat this C as a lower neighbor tone, basically a diatonic passing note, so then I just need to harmonize to the D, so D minor, B diminished, or G major are all options. I'm not going to go through measure by measure the rest of the way, but this is a simple process that you can do to provide you with some harmonic options. And then with all of these chord options, I could choose which ones I want. Playing through all of these combinations might work for some of you, but others might still feel a bit overwhelmed with the options. A few things to help you out. Earlier, I talked about structurally important moments in your melody, like the very beginning, the ends of phrases, the climax of the melody, and the very ending. Sometimes determining those harmonies first can give you a sense of the overall harmonic progression, especially when working with diatonic triads. This is where the relationship between tonic, dominant, and predominant chords can be really important, although I don't think you need to rely on that 100% of the time to create nice progressions. The same is true to some extent with diatonic sequences. Sometimes they work great, but sometimes other options are just as effective. So in this melody, I'll determine the harmonies at these structurally important moments first. Measure 1, measure 4, measure 6, measure 9, measure 11, measure 14, measure 16, and then the last 2 measures. I'll try not to be too repetitive with my chord choice, so something like this might sound a bit stale in my opinion, because I'm not varying my chords enough. These chords, however, create a better overall flow from start to finish without being too repetitive. Now I'll choose some of the filler chords, understanding that these are structurally less important, so it's not as big of a deal if I repeat chords in these moments. right, let me try something different. Instead of one chord per measure, how about two chords? The same sorts of strategies can apply. I'll look at melody notes to determine if there's an implied harmony, and I'll try to notice where the melodic content suggests a chord change within the measure. For instance, in measure 1, the best place for chord changes might be where the stressed melodic notes appear, so that would be beat 1 and beat 2. In measure 2, however, the melody is active on beats 1 and 3, so those beats might be a good place for new chords. Measure 3 is a bit tougher because there are 3 metrically stressed quarter notes. So if I only have 2 chord changes in that measure, where should they go? Well, I think beat 1 certainly, and then either beat 2 or beat 3 would probably work just as well. It's a good idea to play through the melody and chord progression up until this point to see if beat 2 or beat 3 happen to sound better. I might come up with something like this given the restraints I placed on myself. Alright, I'll end this video with one more example. I've shown harmonic changes every measure as well as twice per measure, and each time I used harmonies built from triads with all 3 pitches always present. Why don't I loosen those restraints a bit and allow the number of chords per measure, or more accurately, the harmonic pacing, to be less predictable, or less rigid, and also let the number of chord tones fluctuate over the course of the melody. Because there's such a strong sense of implied harmony in this melody, I don't think it necessarily needs to be fully realized triads throughout. I can be more subtle about how I reveal the chord tones over time, knowing that the melody can do most of the work. So I think by being less rigid about your approach, you can often get more musical results. And as always, be thinking about how your harmonies evolve over time, which, after all, is the whole point of a chord progression. So that's it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'll be making a supplemental video on my Patreon page in the form of a live stream where I harmonize a few more melodies, hopefully sent to me by my current patrons. And if you want to support me, I've linked my Patreon page down below. And the offer still stands for anyone to send me a short unharmonized melody about this length. Thanks again to David for sending this one. And thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.